Everybody okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Right, okay, we'll start with apologies. Do we have any apologies for tonight?
No, Chair.
Sorry, I didn't catch it.
No, Chair, no apologies.
No apologies, okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Sorry, did somebody say? No, okay. Yeah, minutes of the previous... No, obviously. Yeah, we go back. Minutes of the previous meeting. Am I able to confirm that these are a true record of the meeting and I can sign them as such at some point? Or are there any items that need to be discussed?
I'd like to discuss something.
Right.
I'd like to discuss the Treasury Management Report that we saw at that meeting. Why did it change before it got to the executive? Because we agreed it and made the recommendation in that meeting, but what appeared at the executive was different.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not here to answer that one. I can't be myself answer it, but I would imagine that with an ever-changing picture, there's bound to be changes that are made at the last minute. I don't know whether anybody has any comments to make on that. Anybody here who can shed more light on it? I should point out at the moment that we have John Kaiser with us tonight. John Kaiser is here, obviously not to be able to vote at this meeting, but to offer any answers to any questions on the Treasury management strategy that may crop up. So thank you very much, John, for joining us. And hopefully, if there are any questions, you'll be able to come in and answer them for us.
Well, I see Bob's I will be, but I see Bob's got his hand up at the moment, Bill.
Oh, right. I missed that. Sorry, Bob. Would you like to come in, Bob?
Apologies, I turn all the buttons on and off. Yes, Chair. I just want to point out that the report that went to executive was exactly the same report as came to the committee here at the previous meeting in November. It was attached as Appendix A to a covering report, and I will confirm that the covering report had changed, but as things change, we do need to update the executive of the latest position that the council is in. So the actual report that was approved by the Audit Committee was attached to Appendix A, and that was quite clear in the covering report that went to executive, and I believe was voted upon by executive.
Okay, yes, Maria.
Sorry, just turning my mic on. Yeah, so the minutes are quite clear on page 9 that this is the report that's going to be recommended to executive, i.e. the midterm Treasury report. And it wasn't. It was an appendix, and a different report was recommended to executive. And I don't believe that updating numbers is part of the explanation. The thing that happened was that an extra £1 million, 1061, was offset against the finance costs. And I do question whether from now on we're going to have to have a look at every single report that comes to us and ask the question, is this the report that's going to be recommended to executive and to the council, or are changes going to be made? I should add that for some unknown reason, the midterm Treasury report was taken to this committee in November when it's normally taken in February, and that we've never had a covering report before, as far as I can see. This is a completely new process that's been gone through, and I don't accept the argument that this is just updating. This is putting in an extra 1061 million so that the cost of debt goes from £7.52 per household for the benefit of £7.20. And as far as I can see, there's no other reason for it to have been changed. And quite frankly, I think it's disgraceful to overlook the role of this committee. What's the purpose of this committee if we don't look at things and recommend them? When's the actual report that got recommended to exec coming back to this committee? It's just shocking.
Okay. I think Bob has made a statement to cover why that was actually the case on that, and I don't know that we can go any further. It may be interesting
it's
to
in breach of the Constitution, so this is what the problem is our remit as the Audit Committee is to make these recommendations, is to review the Treasury management strategy and the Treasury management reports and monitor them and make the recommendations to the executive. And in this case, we did that, but then the report was changed, and that's not the right way to do things.
Okay, I see, Andrew. You have your hand up. So can I come to you first, and then obviously to John?
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just respond to the point about the Constitution and what it says in the Constitution with regard to the remit of the Audit Committee. And I'm just going to read an extract from the terms of reference. So in terms of, I just like to find the right piece. It says under 4.4.3.1, and it's paragraph K, it says and this is the remit of the Audit Committee, to monitor Treasury management decisions to ensure compliance with the approved Treasury management strategy. So in terms of the mid-year report, what that mid-year report is doing is giving you that information in terms of the committee's ability to monitor that compliance. In terms of the Treasury management strategy, which you've got tonight, and again, I'll just read out the relevant section from the Constitution. It says to agree the Treasury management strategy and policies prior to recommendations being made to the Executive and Council. I won't repeat what Bob said about the fact that the committee's, or the report that the committee saw in November was included in the report to the Executive. But from my point of view, and I appreciate members have different interpretations of the Constitution here, but I think it's quite clear where the remit of the committee is with regard to this matter.
Thank you. John, did you want to come in? I think you had your hand up. John Kaiser.
Yeah, not really, Bill. I mean, Andrew said more or less what I wanted to say. I just would say that we always reserve the right, if we can improve the transparency of the information that we're putting out into the public domain. If we can improve that, we reserve the right to do that, provided we don't change the fundamental numbers.
Well, in this case, it did change the fundamental numbers, which means, yes, you could change it, but it should come back here for a review before it goes on to the Executive to be approved.
Well, I don't
have a problem with you changing it, but it does need to come back here. Hang on a minute, let me finish. I don't have a problem with you changing it, but it needs to come back here for review before it goes to the Executive.
Yeah,
I'll be guided by the officers on that.
So, Councillor G here, I would add that the fundamental numbers were changed because somehow an additional £1 million was added into the report and all the other numbers were changed. It's not even as though it was updated with the benefit of hindsight. It wasn't. An extra £1 million that's never been in any other report before was somehow put into this report. And I think if this committee is exercising their critical faculties, they should reject the report that went to Executive and ask for the report that went to Executive to come back here for discussion.
Okay, Diane. You're on mute, I think.
Sorry,
Diane.
I was on mute.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what Maria and Imogen want to be done about this. I mean, if they're not happy with the process, then presumably we have to look at that for the future. So I think we need to know what they would like to be done, and we need to take advice from officers as to what we can do to deal with this.
Okay, well, I have a very clear idea of what I'd like to be done. I would like the report from Executive to be withdrawn and for the report that went to Executive to come back to this committee to be reviewed at our next meeting. It's an extraordinary meeting we've got in February. It's on the 21st or the 23rd. Mm-hmm. That's time to get in before full council meeting where Executive are recommending to full council. We cannot have exec recommending to full council a report that this audit committee has not rejected and which does contain a fundamental change of numbers, which Councillor Kaiser has just said would be a reason to oppose that report that went to exec. So that's what I would like done, Diane. Thank you.
I'll agree with that. Bring it back here and we can have a look at it.
Can I come back to Andrew as to how we stand on that?
Yeah, I just refer you back to what I just said about sort of the remit of the committee. So when you looked at that mid-year report in your November meeting, the question that you were asking yourself, and we've got Bob here tonight, but it was about compliance with the prudential indicators. That was the fundamental question that you needed to seek assurances on. So if you were to pursue a line of inquiry, I think that would be a legitimate question to ask Bob this evening in terms of whether there was any, or there is any indication of non-compliance against the indicators, against that treasury management strategy. What you've got tonight, and I see Maria's got a hand up, but what you've got tonight is the treasury management strategy moving forwards, which is for you to consider and to approve before it goes to council on the 18th of February. So just to make the point as well that Maria was saying about council or it coming to this committee first before it goes to council. Well, the special meeting of the audit committee is after council on the 18th.
Okay. Yes, Maria.
Notwithstanding what the Constitution says, the recommendations noted in the minutes of our meeting were to recommend a particular version of the midterm Treasury Management Report, to which we did, and then it was changed. And I can't get around that. So notwithstanding what the Constitution says, that's what we made a recommendation of, and that did not happen.
Okay. Thank you. Bob, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate that the report was not changed. It was attached at Appendix A to a covering report to Executive. The covering report was to inform Executive about the report that the Audit Committee received and reviewed and recommended. And attached to the covering report was Appendix 1. That was the report that came to this committee, and that is what Executive was asked to then recommend on to Council. As we do on all our reports, we will provide a covering report that provides information. The decision taken around writing that covering report was actually the information we put in the Treasury report was purely Treasury information. We had a request that we put in more information around the council's financial position, and that's what we did in the covering report. And I actually went out on a limb to say that we cannot change the report that went to Audit Committee, and hence why we wrote a covering report. I don't know if you can call in the covering report, because I believe it is going to council and therefore not subject to call in, but the report that you approved and recommended the committee in November did go to Executive untainted, unchanged, and at Appendix 1.
And unrecommended. So Bob, who asked you to add the additional information in the 10.061 million? Who was instructed you to add that into your report?
That came from my line manager, Mr. Evers, who is the council's chief financial officer, and who I work for.
Right.
Okay.
Our Constitution states in section 12.1.13.5 that the Director of Corporate Services, Chief Financial Officer, shall provide a mid-year annual report to Audit Committee. That he did, prior to being approved by Council, on the exercise of the Treasury Management powers delegated to Treasury Management performance on any material departure from the Code of Practice. He did provide us with a report, but the report that went to Council was not the report that was provided to us. And I just can't get away from that. Sorry, guys.
Well, can I just say that it seems that what Bob said, that the report that went to council was the same as we had agreed here. It was an amendment or an addition to that report that was presented to the executive.
No,
Am I right, Bob?
In the executive, it wasn't. Our report wasn't recommended. So, Bob, I understand that Graham instructed you to do that. So, Councillor Kaiser, did you instruct Graham Ebers, our officer, to add in some extra things to the report? I'm just wondering why Graham might have changed it.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's Graham's report and it's part of the CFO's report. As far as I'm concerned, the report that was presented at the meeting was the actual report that came to you. The amendment, which was a supplementary document, if you like, which was really to illuminate some other issues, didn't actually form part of that report that came to you.
Well, I believe in that instance.
I was I was told it's for transparency.
I believe in that instance, the monitoring officer is supposed to notify us if there's anything controversial going on.
Andrew, you have your hand up. Can I come to you?
Well, I was just going to make the point that the report, Graham Ebers' report, he was the author of that report that went to executive last week. As you'll have noted, the first recommendation on there was specifically around Appendix A. So in other words, the same report that went to the Audit Committee in November, and it went on to the executive in an unchanged format. From Graham's perspective as Section 151 officer, I understand that he felt it was important that he, given the time that has passed since November, that he had added some helpful and useful and transparent information to the executive beyond the report and in addition to the report that you received in November. But I would just bring you back to the point, and it was sort of Councillor King's question as well, about thinking about the remit of this committee, and that remit specifically about seeking assurance that there's been no breach of Treasury management strategies or strategy and policies. And unless Bob would inform the committee otherwise, I don't believe that has been the case in this instance.
Hi, Andrew. In that instance, I can say that, you know, how would we know if the report is changed between what is produced here and then given to the executive and it's different? How would we know if there's been any breach? And if it's our role to monitor that and there's been a change, we should be at least be knowing about it. But what I understand under 12.1.2, the monitoring officer is responsible for advising executive or council on whether a likely decision is considered to be contrary or not wholly in accordance with the financial policy framework. This is kind of where I think that you should have stepped in on this thing and said, look, this is different and how. And I didn't see that happening, which is a bit worrying.
Well, if I could just comment, Chairman, on that. The reason that you didn't see that is because there was nothing from my perspective as monitoring officer that would be considered a breach of the Constitution. I appreciate you'll have a different opinion on that. I think
we do. What I'm happy to do is we'll take this elsewhere, because I'm not sure we could be talking about this all evening otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. The points have been noted. Okay. Are there any other points on the minutes that need to be discussed, or can I assume they are a true record of that meeting? I've got one hand raised. Can't see who it is. I've just got a hand up. Nobody voiced their opinion?
It's Angus.
Angus.
Is it Angus? Oh, Angus. Angus, you have a point to make? Hello, Angus. Where are you? Are you? No, Angus hasn't got his hand up, has he? No.
I've got his hand up on my screen.
Yeah, it's on my screen as well.
Oh, right. Oh, that's strange. Angus, are you there? Angus, you're possibly muted if you are there. No. Well, we'll have to come back otherwise if there is some point that he wishes to raise. I can't manage to get hold of him at the moment. We will move on anyway to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that need to be noted? No. I'll take that as a no. Okay, item 39, public question time. Are there any public questions?
No questions, Chair.
Okay, let me go down. And item 40, members' question times. Do we have any questions from members?
No questions, Chair.
Thank you. And we come on to item 41, which is the formal complaints quarter 3 summary. I don't know who's leading this one at this stage.
That'll be me, Chair.
Right. Good evening.
Everyone. Good evening. So I'm Jacqueline Whitney, and I'm the head of customer delivery here at the council. And the reason I'm here is because the overseeing of complaints actually sits under my service. And I brought 2 colleagues with me this evening to help us go through the report. Dan and Michael, I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, my name's Dan Penny. I work in customer relations and I'm also the link officer for the council to the Ombudsman.
Good evening.
And good evening, my name's Michael Bateman and I'm the Children's Services Complaints and Representations Manager.
Thank you. Okay, back to Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So Dan's just going to take you through now a summary of the report. I believe you have the report in your packs. For ease, I'll share the slides so you guys can see exactly what's on each page as Dan goes through, and then we'll give you a summary of an update from last time around the complaints focus group. So if I just share my slides, if that's okay. Can everybody see that?
Not at the moment. No, it's coming now.
Whiteboarding in progress.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Bear with me 1 second then. That's not the right one, is it? Oh, God.
No.
Hold on 1 second. Right, let's try again. Apologies. That should be the right one now.
That's it. Yes.
Perfect. Let me just widen that for you so you can see. Okay, over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Jackie. Good evening, everyone. So just as a reminder from our when we last visited you at Audit Committee, we confirmed that we had completed a software upgrade to our complaints management system. We also mentioned that we intended to set up a complaints focus group. Our expectation was that these changes would increase the number of complaints recorded and examined, resulting in a better understanding of why our customers complained. The results in the third quarter would suggest these changes have had an impact. The number of complaints recorded in the third quarter increased by 32% compared to the previous quarter, quarter two. Importantly, we have also been able to capture a number of complaints that have been received. We have been able to capture a number of complaints that, when received, were able to be resolved at an early intervention, and thereby did not enter the formal complaints process. This has been a result of communicating to colleagues the importance of recording complaints, no matter how quickly they were resolved. For instance, in quarter two, this number of early complaints that were resolved early totaled 4. In quarter three, this totaled 52. This has been assisted by the complaints focus group. This group meets on a regular basis to ensure learnings are embedded within service processes. From our meetings in quarter three, a couple of themes emerged as to why customers complained. They were, the first one, a lack of clear and accessible information about process and procedure, and how this results in transparency issues regarding how decisions are made. And a second one, which you could say was more seasonal, the impact of social distancing rules from the COVID-19 pandemic and the knock-on effect this had on complaints associated with cold weather. This was especially the case for tenant service requests, which saw a sharp rise in the number of complaints received in quarter three, particularly regarding heating and maintenance issues. As a result, the actions produced from the focus group were to ensure there is clear guidance on what is considered a complaint and how this may differ from unhappiness regarding a decision that has followed the correct decision-making process. For tenant services, to request regular updates from contractors on maintenance callouts and any possible delays to be communicated early so tenant expectations are managed more effectively. For children's services, they designed a log so that learnings from complaints could be recorded and that tangible changes could be discussed and possibly actioned later. Jackie, could you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, no problem.
So this slide gives an overall number and a comparison of the complaints received across each across the period in Q2 and 3. Q1, 2, and 3, and we see the impact of lockdown. Now, I would say that it's quite difficult to make any definitive statements, as services were impacted differently, to say how lockdown impacted the number of complaints received. But it does appear, with the easing of the first lockdown, complaint numbers have steadily increased on an upward trend, despite the second and third lockdowns. Jackie, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. On slide 4, it gives an overall comparison of the volumes of complaints received for each directorate. Children's services, resources and assets, and place and growth contribute evenly in terms of making up a third of the all complaint of the 87% of complaints received by the service council. The remaining 9% and 4% were attributed to adult social care services and community and insight and change, respectively. So that's it from me. Michael, I believe you have something to comment on behalf of Children's Services.
Yes, thank you, Dan. Good evening, everyone. So I'm just going to very quickly run through a summary of the cases that were received under the Children's Act in Q3. In Q3, we had 12 complaints that were evaluated under the Children's Act statutory complaints process. 3 of these were assessed and considered out of scope, and then we had 9 of which that were considered under the formal process. 4 of which we were able to resolve through discussion with the service users, so some cases that we would consider early resolution, and then 5 that received formal stage 1 responses. On top of that, there have also been 3 stage 2 complaints, which involve independent investigations into the cases, and 2 stage 3 panels, which have also been conducted in Q3. In terms of the volumes, they've been spread almost evenly across the service areas and centres that have received the complaints. So we had 2 that were received by Ambleside, 3 for Brambles, 3 for the duty triage and assessment team, and 1 for the family placement team. On top of that, I guess sort of turning a bit more towards the positive feedback, we had 22 formally recorded compliments for the quarter. So these were received from parents, directly from young people that the services have been working with, internally from colleagues and from external agencies. So we've seen that is also an increase on the number of compliments that we saw in Q2. So that was really it in terms of my summary. So Jackie, I know there were a few things you wanted to run through.
Brilliant, thanks Michael. So I'm just going to move down to the insight slide, which is this one just here, which is around the insight that we've seen from the complaints overall across Q3. So we've broken it down into elements such as poor behaviours, lack of connection with the customer, process management, and obviously the current environment within which we're working. So just starting with poor behaviours, some of the themes that we saw, some of the trends were around potential failure to record events, meaning that decisions weren't quite as transparent as they should be in line with guidance and procedures. So we need to make sure that, you know, when we're documenting or making decisions, we document so that we're able to come back to our residents and customers with clear, transparent decision-making processes. In terms of customer connection, we've seen that occasionally we don't respond in a timely manner to customers, so we can get much, much better at that. But also, again, with the transparent decision making and communication, it's all around making sure that the communication is accurate, is understandable, transparent, and again, in a timely manner. So it's making sure that we respond to customers when they need us to and answer any queries when they need our help. In terms of processes, we're looking at making sure that in the last quarter we saw that Maybe us and our partners weren't working so seamlessly together, and we need to make sure that we do work seamlessly with our partners to make sure that timely services are provided and we're all joined up. And then, of course, the current environment. So COVID and lockdown restrictions have impacted on the type of complaints that we're receiving, as Dan's already mentioned. People are spending more time at home and obviously noticing when things aren't happening in their neighbourhood or things should be happening in their neighbourhood, and they obviously express dissatisfaction. In terms of all of these elements here that we've pulled out around insight, there is a fair amount of learning that we need to do and actions we need to put in place. Dan's mentioned previously to you around the complaints focus group that we mentioned we were going to create last time we met, with representation from different service areas to gather insight, learning and trends beyond just that resolve and close. So we really, really want to get better at that and take ownership around reporting as well. So before we end, what I'd like to do is just share with you some of the progress that we've made with the focus group. Now, we established this in September last year, and we have addressed some items already, but the priority for our next quarter really is to work on these 7 key areas of work. The four top key areas there that you'll see is laying the foundations around improvements in processes, reporting, and particularly around ethos. So seeing complaints really as a voice of our customers, a voice of our residents theme. It's a channel for customers to voice their dissatisfaction and provide us with feedback from which we can clearly learn. So that's kind of the first 4 elements there. The remaining 3 areas are really around behaviour and mindset change and how we deal with complaints as an organisation, including the methods we use to communicate to our customers and the language we use to respond. So those were just some of the key areas of work. We've got an action plan for change and improvement, and directorate representatives from each directorate who are now responsible for not only recording complaints but taking ownership and seeing them through. So we have points of contact in each area. Finally, we'd like to share with you some compliments, some examples of compliments that we've received.
Yeah, this gives a small sample of types of compliments the council has received over the last 3 quarters, and hopefully this gives some balance to what we've seen a rise in the number of complaints over the last 2 quarters. But as Jackie mentioned, we're treating now complaints as a really valuable resource for gathering insight about our residents and how we can improve the services for them. That's it from me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dan. So thank you so much for your time. We're now happy to take any questions.
That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Okay, now hands up. I can see Imogen. Would you like to ask your question, Imogen?
Sure. Looking at this report, what is the difference between stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, and how does the complaint? What are the mechanisms for a complaint progressing from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3?
Dan, do you want me to take that one?
Yep, sure, okay.
So stage 1 is kind of the first stage in resolving a complaint. What we try and do is we try and resolve early resolution. So wherever possible, early intervention. If a customer contacts us and says, actually, there's something wrong, we just need to get on and fix it and resolve it as soon as possible. So that's kind of an informal stage. If, for example, it's slightly more complex and it requires maybe a written response, much more detail and more working through and more investigation than just a fix, then that's a stage 1 complaint. And that's where we have a certain amount of time to investigate it, work with the services on a response. Stage 2 happens then if our customer's still not happy. So say, for example, they get the stage 1 response and they're not happy with that. They do have the right to request an escalation to stage 2, which means an independent investigation. It's still internal, but it's my team that will investigate that rather than the team where the original dissatisfaction started. And then, of course, the next stage is the ombudsman.
So the client says, I'd like to go to stage 2. So that is what triggers it. So it's from them. So I'm assuming you speak to them on the phone, you send them a letter, they say, actually, this isn't good enough, I want to go to stage 2. And are those instructions clear in the letter or whatever it is they get? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. So whenever we write out in a stage 1, a formal stage 1 complaint, what we generally say, what we always say to them is we say you can escalate. If you're still unhappy, you are able to request an escalation to stage 2. But what we then do is we work with them. So, you know, we'll perhaps phone them or however they want us to communicate with them to find out exactly what they're unhappy with and how we can help resolve it quickly without dragging it through another process, because obviously that's painful for them and you know, we want to resolve as quickly as possible. So we're very, very clear on the outcome, on their outcome. What is it they're looking to see before we escalate to stage 2?
Okay. So you communicate with telephone mainly or by letters or?
We'll do it, and whichever way the customer wants us to communicate with them. We always find that the phone, picking up the phone and speaking to them, or face to face, obviously when the offices were open, is always the best way, because we can always, you know, get across messages that way. That much that way.
I noticed on this report you have an option for letters. How many complaints you receive by letter? Why is it there if nobody uses it, or does anybody use it ever?
Some people do, yeah, some people do. Some people will write in to the council and complain. Mostly it's by email, or we've got some online forms, and we're looking at developing a new online form. But sometimes they do, so, and that's fine. And sometimes it's verbal as well. So if we take complaints verbally.
It doesn't specify that in your report, though. You've got letters there, and it's all zeros. It doesn't say whether they walked in and said it or they phoned up and said it, or it just says email.
Mostly email. Yeah, it's mostly email. Sometimes mostly email.
Okay, thank you very much.
No.
Thank you very much. Daniel Sargent.
Thank you. Yes, good evening, and thanks for the report. It was very clear. I've got a couple of related questions, so I might ask them both at the same time, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
And they both relate to the ombudsman numbers. So I noticed they're rising a little bit over time. My first question is whether there's any particular trend that is causing that, or whether it's, you know, whether they're all kind of different factors that are driving those kind of complaints. And secondly, I noticed, like, of the 9 ombudsman complaints there were in Q3, there were 3 of them where they're still being reviewed. And I wonder, at what point do we find out as this committee what happened with those? Is there an annual report that looks back at all this, or is there a mechanism there? Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you, Daniel. So the reason there's been kind of a slight increase is because during the first shutdown, the ombudsman also closed, and they didn't open till June or July this year. So what happened? I think that's right, Dan, isn't it? I think it was June or July this year they opened. So what they had was a backlog. So they didn't actually accept any more complaints, even though customers were going through the ombudsman, not from Wokingham specifically, but it did create a backlog, which meant that their investigators were slowly working through, which is why you probably see kind of the slight increase there. Then in terms of those that they're still investigating, we just have to wait for them to come back to us and let us know. But what we do in the next report, in the next quarter report, is always report on those that have come in the previous quarter, if that makes sense. So we'll find out, hopefully in quarter 4, what's happened.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
No worries.
Angus, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, unmuted to work this time. This last time, that's what I wanted to.
You're breaking up a little bit, Angus.
What I say was from the item that my colleagues, would you, the chairman, to speak and not in?
Hold on,
had our hands up and never called.
Can I just hold you there, Angus? I don't know whether everybody else can hear, but you're breaking up, I believe.
I can't hear anything.
No.
Yeah.
No, me neither.
No. It's a bad connection somewhere there, Angus, and we're unable to hear you.
Okay.
I'll go to, perhaps we can sort that one out. If I go to Maria first, we'll come back to you in a moment, Angus, if that's okay.
Angus could dial into this meeting, and that might
Yeah.
work better as a phone call.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to try that, Angus. Yeah, in that case, we'll go to Maria, who has a question.
No, actually, it's just an observation. So last year I got completely confused with this report. And so, but this one I found really easy to follow, and it's really clear. So I just want to express my gratitude that it's so clear and easy to follow this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks for your comments.
Okay, shall we try Angus again? Are you any clearer now, Angus? We seem to have lost him altogether again. Perhaps he is trying to dial in. Yeah, hear you at the moment. Let's try it.
If you could. I was going to say on this one.
We are losing you, Angus.
All right, I'll give up.
If you want to try and dial in. Right, okay. We'll have to come back to him if he comes in later, so we're losing him all the time. Okay, are there any other questions? Anybody else to ask any questions of our guests? Not at all. So, well, okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Michael.
Thank for your time, Chair.
Thank you.
If he does have any questions, or if Angus does have a question, then just let me know and we can make contact with him.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Jolly good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, we'll come on to the next item on the agenda, which I've just lost which is the Treasury Management Strategy. I don't know, is Bob, are you presenting this one, Bob?
Yes, it falls to me, Chair.
Thank you.
I'll present it, or I'll give the starting preamble. I also have Mark Thompson along with me, who is my Chief Accountant, and he will be available to help with some of the technical questions, I hope, or answer most of the technical questions if we do get any. So I suppose the first thing to state that this is the annual report on the Treasury Management Strategy for the Council. It goes from this committee through to executive and then on to the council and forms part of our annual budget setting process. As such, it links very closely with our medium-term financial plan and our capital strategy and programme. It is a report that actually gets a lot of the parameters in it are driven by our capital programme and our anticipated capital spend over the next 3 years. I suppose it's very clear to state at this point, this is a forward-looking report. So the other two reports that come to committee tend to be retrospective, backward-looking, as in performance and what we have done in the council in compliance with our TMS that we set here. But this one is estimates of where we're going to go, and our expectation of our prudential limits that we're setting in this report. And in those prudential limits, it's the parameters for our borrowing and our investing by the Finance Treasury team that we're looking for the committee to review, discuss, and hopefully agree that we have got the right parameters to follow. What I will say at this stage is it's a new style presentation. We have tried this year, as with some of the other reports, to make this less a technical Treasury report and more of a report that the reader can understand and read. Hence why we introduce it with the covering report that gives us a fair amount of background around the Treasury, what the Treasury does, and what the Treasury does in terms of our levels of debt in the council. The actual bones of the report in terms of the technical Treasury part is contained in appendices A, B, C and D. And that's potentially, as Andrew mentioned earlier, where we are looking for the committee to make comment and recommendations on that. I have to apologise, or not really apologise, but confirm to the council that we sent round today an addendum. This is where we've had to change the report, and as I say, it's forward looking and driven by a medium-term financial plan. So at this stage in the year, we're always constantly updating the report to reflect what the medium-term financial plan and capital strategy are saying. We've now very much finalised those reports and the strategies, and we've now incorporated that impact into the Treasury Management Strategy. So the addendum that went round today will also need to be part of the recommendation that the Chair will put forward at the end of the meeting, or the end of this part of the meeting. And I also have to draw your attention to a further amendment that we came across today, and thank you to Maria for asking the question and making us look deeper at what we've done. And on page 59, there is a series of ratios of our asset cover ratios in terms of asset value against our it's our gross expenditure budget, our net revenue streams. And those ratios have now changed, and we'll have to send this round to yourselves after this meeting, and I apologise for that. But as I say, it's a living live document until the MTFP gets signed off at council. So the ratios are now being presented as 1.03%. This is page 59, sorry for everyone trying to follow it. 0.36% and 0.30%, as opposed to what we're showing in the report of 1.0%, 0.7% and 0.6%. The key one potentially for that we're looking at is the first year one of the 1.03, which is based on a firm recommended budget to council. The other two ones are based on the indicative budget and will certainly be revised and reviewed prior to next year's medium-term financial plan and Treasury Management Strategy. At that point, I don't particularly want to go through it, other than just recommending to you on page 32 the changes to the strategy we're looking at. And I'll explain why we're doing these. They're more to allow us to function as a council treasury team. So the first one is to recommend opening a deposit account with our transactional banker. We have on occasions this year had in surplus of money. We've had government grant come in, we've had government support for grants to pay out. They've come on some occasions totally unexpected, and we've had to actually hold money in our current account over and above what I would deem to be the prudent level in that account. But because our other call accounts were full, and I say call accounts, I mean money on short-term callback, which is the money market funds, we're actually obliged to hold more money in our our current account at the time. So what we're looking at doing now is also opening a deposit facility with our transactional banker, which is National Westminster Bank. The second one we're doing is based on the same scenario, in that we're looking to increase the amount of money we can hold in each of our money market funds. These money market fund limits have been set for a number of years now and not been increased. And we believe now time is right to increase them. I have no worries about increasing money market funds. Money market funds are probably the only AAA rated fund out there that we have access to at this point in time. They are deemed to be one of the most secure investments you can get, and security of our investment is always the priority of our Treasury Management Strategy, and it's stated out through there. And the third one is something that I've put in the report and asked to go in the report because it's something we may want to do. It's not an intention to do it, but we know one of our near neighbours has recently offered a local authority bond as a way of raising funds and debt financing themselves in a cheaper way than the government's PWLB and going to the money market to see what's available. So what I've done is just put in the facility, if we wish to avail ourselves of it, the ability to raise a local authority bond. These were very popular back in the, I believe in the 70s almost and 80s, as a way of raising finance for local authorities. And it's a good way for local residents to actually invest in their local authority. We're AA rated in terms of the fact we have government backing, so we're as strong as any of the government's national savings initiatives, and it actually sees, people can see what they're doing. The authority that's done it already locally is West Berkshire, And if you want to check out some of their news pages, it is a good news story if we go down that line. And that's potentially what I want to talk about now, Chair, if you don't mind. And I'll take questions, or Mark may do. I've stunned you to silence, Bill. You're on mute.
Right. Yeah, go to Angus first, as he's got his hand up, and it would be nice to be able to hear you. So, Angus. Hello, Angus. No. Oh dear. Right. Okay. Well, let's go to Rachel. Rachel.
Oh.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report, Bob. I wanted to start by asking about this net benefit from borrowing figure, which I see we've specifically been asked to approve in the recommendations. So this is another change, as you mentioned, to the way that we do Treasury management reporting. We did come across other changes, sort of similar changes at the last meeting. And the concern, obviously, is that arguably we're not doing that from a transparency point of view, as was alluded to earlier, but actually to present the situation in a more positive light. I mean, at the last meeting, we were told that the net cost of borrowing was £77.52 per taxpayer after various things have been netted out. So now we're told that actually the cost of borrowing creates a net benefit of £13.64. So actually the cost of borrowing is not actually a cost at all. Just sort of specifically looking at the calculation in terms of the detail of how it's calculated. So this is page 30. This is page 30. Is now exiting of the pack. So I can understand, I can understand a calculation that basically says this is the cost of borrowing. We're going to net off that any benefit that's derived from assets that that borrowing has brought into being, as it were. So that sort of makes sense. But can you explain to me why, for example, Treasury investments income would be set off that figure, and what the relevance of Treasury investment income is to the cost of the borrowing figure? Because I would have thought the Treasury investments they're not assets that have been sort of enabled by the borrowing. They're just ways to store surplus cash. So why is that figure being netted off the cost of borrowing figure?
Yes. I suppose to answer the questions in order. I think the first one was why it moved from £7.52 cost to the taxpayer to a credit of, and just check my own report. He says that. Where we go. It is now £13.64, is because when we produced the Treasury mid-year report, and this goes back to why we've also enhanced the covering report and that report to executive, it was only taking out the cost of borrowing. So when we put figures through into the now joining medium-term financial mid-year report, Treasury mid-year report, we assessed that the cost of borrowing based on our budgeted cost of debt financing in the budget, and we extracted from that the amount that came in from our investor save and income generating projects. What we didn't put in there was the whole impact effect of those projects, and it was considered that a more realistic position would be to show not just the amount of money that those projects generate to offset the debt financing costs, but to actually add in the whole benefit to the council that came from those projects. And in the same way as we showed it as a cost to the taxpayer of £7.52 for the amount they were having to fund from the general fund balance, i.e. general fund borrowing, we then added the extra detail in there, which covers the amount of extra income that these investor save projects, regeneration projects and commercial activities at the time generated for the council, which gave a net credit or benefit to the local taxpayer of that £13.64. So that's why it's changed since the mid-year report. We're actually showing a fuller and more transparent picture, and that's what I've endeavoured to try and do through the report, going through it. In terms of why it's prudent to offset the Treasury investments, I have two potential budget lines within my Treasury department. One is our cost of borrowing, and one is our return on investment. Now, the net position from that obviously is one less the other. So it again makes sense to do that. So when we're looking at what we're trying to work out, how much of our actual net cost of borrowing or cost of borrowing is, we take off the money we get in from our investments. We take off the money that comes in from investor saves. We take off the money we get from regeneration projects, which then gives us a balance where we get to that figure. But again, as I stated earlier, we then show also the net credit that these projects generate.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I understand why you would net off the income generated from the assets which the borrowing is created, but I'm still not sure about the netting off of the Treasury investment income. You know, I mean, it would, and you know, that being said, it would be equally accurate, wouldn't it, to use the gross figure and say, you know, the borrowing costs are 8.3 million next year, and that's a cost of, you know, £100 or so for the taxpayer. It does depend on which figures you present.
It could be, but you're only giving part of the picture then, and what we're trying to do is give a truer and fuller picture of the actual impact upon the taxpayer of our borrowing, and then offsetting it by all the contributions to that borrowing figure that come in, one of which would be our return on our Treasury investments as well.
Okay, I mean, another, on a similar theme, another presentational change is that you've introduced this concept of supported borrowing, and shied away, I think, from presenting what we normally see, which is a summary of external borrowing, internal borrowing, and then a total borrowing figure. And again, I would ask why that has been changed in terms of the presentation, and also because it's not sort of clear to me. Am I right that if we were to present it in that way, that total borrowing figure is rising up to 678 million by 23-24? Is that a correct reading of this?
Certainly, in terms of supporting the capital programme, that is the level of borrowing we'd be moving to. But again, it's not borrowing. We're looking at the external debt figure is the figure that we're looking as our borrowing numbers. So we have internal borrowing where we use our own resources to do that, to support the programme. And the true figure we would probably more focus on when we're talking about debt levels of the council would actually be the external debt we borrow from third parties. So we have a cost of financing requirement, which is our, it's a technical calculation that we use to show what the cost would be if we were to support the programme based after we've taken off all the money that comes in to support it from other sources, such as grants, contributions, and any other revenue contributions you make to support the programme. The rest is then what's left to be funded by either internal or external borrowing, and therefore the external debt is a figure we look at. So the figure you give for our total requirement to fund our capital programme is quite correct, but it's not what we're going out and borrowing as a council, and that's the key point that we're trying to bring across when we're trying to show a truer and more full picture of the Treasury position.
Yeah, okay, and lastly, just a couple of points on the investment strategy side of things. One was with regard to negative interest rates and what you, as a finance team, how you sort of assess the risk of that in terms of, you know, likelihood still potentially on the horizon, but perhaps more importantly, the impact of that, either positive impacts, negative impacts. And then secondly, with regard to, you talked about the way you invest your cash, money markets, etc. And I can see you've got a number of different limits with different counterparties and that kind of thing, as you'd expect. Do you have a limit on how low your sort of instant access cash balances can fall, say, you know, measured in a number of days or whatever?
We have a managed cash flow position, so we work out what our cash flow is. We try to set a daily balance that leaves us potentially between 100 and 200,000 pounds in the bank for any emergency transactions that occur during the day. In terms of where we are, yes, it's all based on where we know the money's going back out again, the liquidity of our balances. So we tend to hold money on instant access in the money market funds, which we can draw down the next day or the same day as we require them. But it's based on knowing what we got coming up. So we have a cash flow projection that will obviously on the 28th of the month take account of the payroll that goes out of the council. We have weekly payment runs paying suppliers. We know what the balance of theirs going to be. We know when we have to pay our precepts over to the police and fire authorities. We know when we also have to pay over contributions to HMRC for VAT and for income tax. So we have all these items recorded, and that's what we work on. So we make sure that there's sufficient money in the instant access accounts, or that our longer term deposits come back at the right time to make sure we have the cash flow available to pay our liabilities on those days. And as I say, we work on a rough balance of around 100,000 in the account, so we can actually pay off it. So if an emergency payment came in to pay people, we would have the money available to do that. So is there a figure I keep in mind? No, there's not, but I do know that we keep the money available to come back when we need to pay it out. And after security, liquidity is the next driver of where we place our money and investments.
Okay, any points on the negative interest rates question?
Sorry, yeah, negative interest rates. We are desperately trying to avoid using negative interest rates, hence why the request to increase the amount of money we can put in money market funds. And I do know some money market funds are potentially talking about going into negative rates at this stage. What I don't want to be doing at any point in time is actually paying someone to look after our money for us. However, if that is a situation that the country goes into, I can't influence that. Unfortunately, I wish we had enough reserves to do that. And I suppose where we'll try and keep in accounts that offer positive or zero interest rates before we start going to negative. And if we go to negative, the chances are we'll probably use the debt management office facility, which is probably the closest we're going to get to a safe, well, it's 100% safe position because it's backed by the British government. And they're probably, if they are negative, they'll be one of the least negative interest rates available. But ideally, I have to be secure with our money. And I suppose if it means paying someone to look after it, even only temporarily, rather than risking it in a current account that may be exposed and the amounts we're talking about, then I would have to look at where's the best negative interest rate to go for, unfortunately. But I'm desperately trying to avoid it. And we have created a new money market fund that potentially is a UK-based fund as opposed to the ones we currently use, which are across the European Union. And part of it is to make sure we have security and access to funds following the exit from the European Union. And that one has a better chance of staying positive than some of the others.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to Angus. I know he's back online now. I don't know whether he has a question for you or whether the questions he had related to an earlier topic. Are you available, Angus?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's on my telephone. No, I don't have anything on this item. And I think if I could just make the point I tried to make 2 items back, was that would my colleagues please obey the chairman and not jump in, because I had my hand up and people were just jumping in on their own. But I have no questions on this particular item.
Thank you very much. I wasn't aware that you were trying to come in. I don't know whether your hand was up and we tried to get you. Well, I'll watch out for that in future anyway. Okay, we come now to Daniel Sargent.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to, first of all, lend my voice of support to the format of the report, because I think you've got the summary report and you've got the main body of the report, and it seems to me that, you know, all the detail we've had every year is kind of still there in the body of the report, but now you've got a much more clear explanation in the summary around some of the key figures. And I think, you know, particularly in the last year or so, we've seen, you know, sometimes councillors get confused about our debt levels and things like that, and different numbers thrown around. And, you know, I think the summary report makes that really crystal clear what the key figures are for people to watch for. I just have one question really, and that was on the graph on page 31 in the summary report, on the asset value numbers. I just wondered if you could comment a little bit. I know they're coming from the balance sheet, those figures, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the valuation methods used on some of those assets, which I think are primarily property and land and houses potentially.
Yes, if I can start, and I'll probably hand over to Mark about the technical way we calculate the values on the balance sheet, because he owns the balance sheet as the chief accountant. Thank you very much for the feedback on the report. I'm glad that it is being seen as an improvement to where we're going. I think we still have some, not too far to travel, but it is an intention to try and make an informative covering report that most people, all people, can understand. And then we keep the techie stuff into the appendices, which we have to do. And a lot of stuff in the appendices, as I said before, is stuff we have to report based on the SITFA guidance around Treasury. In terms of the asset values, we have shown the asset value as per the balance sheet. This is in almost to mirror what the government do, central government, with their whole of government accounts. They have the whole of thing, and it's really showing the fact that as an authority, the level of debt that we're holding, and we can discuss the internal debt, external debt, CFR, but the level of external debt that we are borrowing against the actual value of the assets we've created. And some people may say, well, some of those assets aren't redeemable. You can't actually realise those value assets. But the fact is, we've used our capital resources to purchase those assets and acquire them over a number of years. So things like our highways infrastructure, we're constantly updating, upgrading, and that's where we will put in the whole asset value to show the value of the assets acquired by the council's capital programme, part of which is supported by borrowing, part of it is supported by government grants, and part of it is supported by developer contributions over a number of years. If I can pass on to Mark now for the more technical aspect of how we do our valuations, I'm sure he can enlighten people.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Yeah, as Bob said, Mark Thompson, the Chief Accountant, so I work with Bob. I probably won't go into too much of the technical details, but in terms of the asset value, what we've used is the balance sheet, so that is all of the council's assets. So some of those assets will be, for example, known as investment properties, so they are revalued every year on market value. Some of those assets, for example, schools and roads, are valued on replacement cost. The increase over the 3 years is mirrored by our increase in investment in capital programme. So that additional spend over 3 years, about 450 million in capital spend, will create assets of a cost value of 450 million. It's difficult with asset value because, as you know, how much something's worth is how much someone's willing to pay for it. But what I would say is that some of our assets, if we were to try and sell them and realise a capital receipt for them, be higher, because, for example, with land, you can get planning permission and that will boost the value of the asset. So it's a real difficult one to get an exact value, but we've used the balance sheet and then added the capital programme for the next 3 years to give us the 1.4 billion of asset value.
Thank you. Yeah, it's probably an unfair question for me to ask because it's probably so detailed an answer you need to give. But I guess I was just trying to get a sense of, how conservative or aggressive some of those valuations are, because I know, for instance, the council owns quite a bit of land, and if that's measured as a valuation from quite some time ago, then potentially it's quite a conservative assessment there. But thank you for the answer. And I think maybe John wants to come in. Yeah, John, is it something about this topic that you want to speak on?
Actually, I've had my hands up for quite some time now.
Yeah, I see you there. I didn't know whether I'm coming to you. If you can just give me a minute, but I noticed that John Kaiser has his hand up, and I think it might be something that's just been mentioned that he may want to make a point on. I'm coming back to you. Don't worry, John.
Thank you. I think it's really important about the assets. We're very, I don't like to use this word, but we're very conservative in the way that we value our assets, especially when you look at they don't make land anymore. And everybody knows that a piece of land today that could be valued as a piece of farmland that's in the countryside. I mean, if those assets ever get planning permission, I mean, they go from something like £30,000 an acre to £1.1 million an acre. So we are very, very prudent in the way we value our assets.
Thank you very much for that. Maria.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say that I wrote to Bob earlier today and he has provided me with some very comprehensive answers. So that's really good. And thank you, Bob, for doing that sort of last minute. So I'm going to ask questions related to the 4 questions I asked Bob. Actually, the first one's just an observation. So, Bob, you replied to me about the total borrowing. And I'm just wondering, the numbers are slightly different to the way I calculated it, including the internal borrowing. Is that to do with the...
Because the person who produced the table in your answer, so he may give you a better answer than I can on that one. Okay, Mark.
Today, there's only a small amounts different. I just think that the changes that went through in the additional paper we had might mean that table has to change a little bit. That's all.
Yeah, we will look at that then. And I said before, there is a one change that will come through before it goes to executive. So we will obviously share any changes we make between now and executive and or council with the committee. You're trying to say this is an evolving report. So yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My second and third questions are sort of linked to each other, and they're to do with the financing cost to net revenue stream that was predicted last year compared to this year. So you kindly gave me the calculations for the financing cost to net revenue stream, which if people want to have a look at it, it's the table on page 30 is the net annual financing cost, which goes from 2.1 to 0.7 to 0.6. But last year it was 3.4 million, and I just want to understand that the basis for that calculation of the net annual financing cost hasn't changed between last year and this year. So that is, last year, did you include the income from Treasury investments, which Rachel has just asked about? And did you include the housing, local economy and regeneration? Because I couldn't find the calculation. I think the offset was something like 3,447 last year. So is it the same basis this year for 2021-22 as it was for the predictions last year? Because last year it was 2021-22 was predicted at 2.4%, and this year it's going to be, what, 1.03%?
Yes and no is probably the way to answer that one. Yes, we have actually changed the calculation, but because we realised, having looked around it, that we may well have been doing it slightly incorrectly. But it's not the level of debt financing what we're bringing into there or any of the offsets. We're quite clear in our report that the annual financing costs are 2.1 million. But what we've changed is the level of gross revenue expenditure that we divide it by. And we've based our calculation previously on not the full amount of expenditure. What we've looked at now is the code, and we are learning and improving all the time. And I believe the code was reissued a few years back. We may not have caught up, but it's the net revenue stream is the estimate of the amounts to be met from government grants and local taxpayers. So what we've done is we've summed up all the grants we're getting in from taxpayers, and all the grants from government and all the money coming in from local taxpayers, which gives us an expenditure reference of 204. We're using gross expenditure revenue as a proxy for the net stream, because obviously the gross revenue expenditure is part of a balanced budget. So when we set the budget for the MTFP, we set a budget that is offset where the expenditure equals the income. We are required to do that by statute. So what we found now is the actual number we're dividing the net annual financing cost by is larger than it was last year, because we left some items out last year. We believe they now should be in, and that's why we've adjusted it to the correct calculation. I understand that it is always important with audit and reviewing things that we shouldn't change too much from what we did previously. However, we also believe that where we think there's a better and more accurate representation, we have a duty to make sure we report it in the correct manner.
Yeah, I think it would have been a good idea maybe to redo the calculation for last year so we could see what it was like, as you did in the additional paper, and also explain what's different. So what sort of income is in housing, local economy and regeneration?
There's a variety of income lines coming in through there. Potentially the probably biggest one will be the housing benefits, which is a government grant that comes in, which we then obviously use to pay benefits to our residents.
So in housing, local economy and regeneration, there's housing benefits. That doesn't
I believe so.
that doesn't seem to be a financing income to me.
I think, Bob, we're referencing the table on page 30, so the 4.8 million.
Yeah, the
sorry, apologies. No, yes, looking at the table, that is the money that's coming in from the regeneration works around the towns.
So what sort of income is it?
Sorry?
What sort of income is it? Is it finance income or is it things like rentals and stuff like that?
For regeneration, it'll be rental income that we use part of that rental income to repay the financing costs.
Okay, so the instruction on I think it's page 20. Is it 27? Let me find my notes. It says that financing costs. I wrote to Bob and I asked him about this. I said finance costs have a very specific meaning as a prudential indicator and cannot, for example, include surplus income generated from assets. This is what you stated on page 27. So I think that there's got to be a very good justification for having things in a prudential indicator, which is defined, as I understand it, by the code. You can't really include rentals, and especially not if you didn't include them last year. But the problem is I can't work out what the breakdown was last year. I think that net annual financing costs should include exactly that, financing. So things like interest income or so income from treasury investments is okay, but things like surplus rent from investment projects is specifically disallowed under the SIPFA code, and I don't think that should be in there. And therefore, I wonder whether that's the reason that the indicators have gone from 2.4% for 2021-22 down to 1.03%, i.e. it's including things this year that weren't included last year for good reason and are included this year for not a very good reason, if you like. Sorry,
I would potentially argue that if we take the table on page 30, what we're showing is the amount of money we put aside to support the borrowing of the council.
That's not what this. I can understand.
Can I just finish? So at the 8.3 is the money that we've put into our general fund budget for next year to repay debt and interest financing charges on it. Now, obviously, what we have is a number of projects that we use as invest to save, self-financing that comes through there. And we have made a deduction from them of that general fund repayment and interest charge, plus the money coming from treasury investments, which gives us our net annual financing cost of 2.1 million. The surplus money, which you talk about, is what we report below. And it's quite clear, I hopefully anyway, that money is in there. And this is where we get the difference between 7.52 charge to the taxpayer, which would be that 2.1 million next year going forward, that will be divided by the tax base to give us a figure for that. But we also then add on the surplus money, which turns it into the positive credit to the taxpayer. Yeah. So what we're showing now is, as I've said before, and I hope it's clearer, a more complete picture, not just of what the element that the taxpayer has to fund, i.e. the general fund balance after we've had deductions for the self-financing projects, but the surplus that those then projects generate show a credit to the taxpayer, which is below that annual net financing cost line. So yeah, in terms of the code, I think we have complied.
I still don't think that I understand what's in housing, local economy and regeneration, mainly because I don't have a breakdown of it.
Well, we have obviously in there the town centre regeneration that is making, you have a straight line below it which says town centre regeneration 0.9. Yeah. What we also have is money that the town centre provides to support the cost of the borrowing. So no more, no less than the actual cost of the borrowing and the repayment charge is in that 4.8. Also money we provide to our housing companies that they repay to us in terms of the financing cost is in that 4.8. Okay. And that's why we are showing that there, because that is actually coming directly and being offset against our borrowing cost of the council to give that your financing cost of 2.1 million.
Right, okay. So the numbers that were included in, I understand the number changing in the denominator. So I'm happy with that you recalculated it, although I would have liked to have seen last year. But the number that's in the numerator this year is exactly the same calculation as was in the numerator last year. Is that right?
I can't confirm that without going back and checking what the number was. As I say, we have been, I think, clear this time that we are showing the net impact for the taxpayer of our debt financing costs. So where we have self-funding projects, it is a better way to show it this year, I believe, of taking out those projects that, to use the David Dickinson phrase, wipe their face. Yeah. And also the money we get in treasury investments. Right. This may well be a change from last year. I can't confirm that going back and looking at last year's right now.
Okay, so if you could let me know that would be really good. So I understand that how the denominator has changed. If you can let me know how the numerator has changed, that would be really good. Just following on from Rachel's question, and I've only got one more question after this. The benefit per bandy property. Am I right in thinking that this is only the direct costs? Well, actually not even the direct costs. So you don't include, for example, the costs of managing the properties or the costs of investing in commercial investments or treasury investments. There's none of the direct costs of staff in there, because I would query the benefit per bandy property. I don't think it is the net annual benefit. It may be some form of net annual benefit, but it's not the net annual benefit. Because I think that one would have to take into account the costs of someone, for example, whose job is wholly or mainly investing in treasury investments or commercial investments.
You could, as I suppose, make that as a discussion. I would potentially put the counter in that the people who are employed by the council are already funded by the taxpayer as part of their precept. So my treasury team is part of a team that is funded by the annual MTFP. So in there is a line for my treasury accountants and for myself and for Mark and the time we spend on it. And I would deem there would be sunk costs in that that's not their only job, but it's part of the job they do. And we would have them in there. So if you take the fact that the taxpayer has a precept that they pay, and part of that precept is funding these people, then anything that contributes back to it would be a benefit to those taxpayers.
Okay, thank you.
As I say, I'd be keen to stress we are not actually refunding people money. What we're doing. Okay,
I've got one quick question for Mark then, which is the last one, which I already highlighted to you in my email earlier. So, Mark, of these asset values, how much of these, because this appeared in a previous report, how much of these could you actually sell in order to, and would, so say if the council was wound up and you'd have to repay the external debt, how much is the value of the assets, say at 20, well, even in the balance sheet that you could sell? Because in a previous report, we had both realisable and non-realisable assets, and then the realisable assets were broken down into operational assets and other. And I would have thought that it's sort of over-egging it a bit to put in all of the assets, especially things like half-finished roads or schools, which we can't keep, that type of thing, or vans, which the council uses to do its business, at their whatever cost they're in there at, or whatever value they're in there at. So I'd like you to comment on why you've included everything, I think.
In terms of, I suppose, breaking down that asset value, that's difficult for me to give you at the moment, but I can definitely go away and come back with a
I understand
a revised, well, a split of those assets.
Yeah, I understand that everything is included in that red line. What I guess I'm quibbling about is the relevance of that red line by including everything.
Could I just comment that in that scenario, if the council was wound up, then potentially all its assets would be available to be realised. It's not a scenario that we would ever contemplate. The council has to continue working, and if we were in a position where we were in a situation financially that we couldn't continue to operate, then the government would step in and would probably take over any of the assets. So I understand that you're saying what could we realise to make and pay back our debt. I suppose it's an argument of a scenario that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I think, Bob, the reason I asked about it is because in a previous report, I think it was the November one, you actually only put in the realisable assets and
we
left
did
out.
indeed. And as I say, this is, I suppose, the development of our report, an iterative process. We're trying to make things better, clearer, and more understandable for the reader going forward. So yes, we put it in the last report. Since going on then, we've also expanded the change from what's the net cost of our debt financing to the taxpayer to the net credit to the taxpayer of all our investment activities around it. So as part of that, we've also recognising that in compliance with the same as the government do in their whole of government accounts, we show the full asset base and asset value, which ties back into our statement of accounts, as we said with Daniel earlier.
And it excludes the HRA assets, I guess, that red line.
I believe
so. The graph is just the general fund. Just to add to what Bob said in terms of the asset value, in terms of the external debt, some of the external debt will be linked to things like roads and schools, historic, what we call as general fund borrowing, which we split out further in the report. So we actually split our borrowing between what's known as supported and general fund borrowing. So I suppose for completeness, if we're showing the borrowing that's linked to those assets, schools and roads, that's known as general fund borrowing, we therefore included the equivalent asset value as well, to make sure we were showing both sides.
Okay, thank you. Thanks you for those very complete answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, to Imogen.
Hi there. I won't say much because most of my questions have been asked anyway. But I'm feeling a little sort of confused, and I've got one sort of thing left, is that I couldn't understand why the investment property portfolio wasn't part of this treasury management. Or have I missed it?
You've missed it. So part of it comes in the the housing, economy and local regeneration, which is basically where we repay the borrowing that we've used to acquire properties for regeneration and protect the local economy going forward, which is in the commercial property portfolio. And then there's also a line below that, which is the commercial investments, which is the 2.2 million, again on page 30, that actually shows the money over and above the financing costs that these portfolios investments are making.
Okay, it's just not very clear to say, this is the property investments. And I noticed in there you've got that you don't want to invest outside the borough, but obviously some of these things are outside of the borough.
If I can just address that one quite quickly. When we purchased properties outside the borough, we were allowed to. We now have been confirmed by the government last 2 years ago that we couldn't do it, or shouldn't be doing it. And we haven't done it since. And we're now changing our whole process around commercial, where our primary reason for doing these is no longer investment return, but looking at local regeneration, supporting the local economy, protecting employment, and just making sure that there's a benefit to the local people other than just money.
Which was the spirit of the original concept of this anyway, which I'm fine with. I did see that in the report and I was glad to see it there, but it's just not very clear which are investment properties, and obviously we've got assets like schools and roads and things, and I found it difficult to distinguish those two in the report.
Again, we'll try and make that clearer as we go forward in the next iteration. The commercial investments is the money from the property that's coming through.
Okay, but not everything we have that's a commercial properties. I'm just thinking of the Marks and Spencer store in Wokingham. Where does that fit? The old Marks and Spencer's
potentially sit within the town centre regeneration. I would assume.
So.
I'll give that.
But yeah, it's obviously not an investment property, but it is part of the regeneration. Yeah, it's just
yes. So we're very conscious that we ring fence our regeneration funds and money. And returns, because they're funded slightly differently.
As I understand it, with the town centre regeneration, there is not one penny that has come back to the council yet. Is that true? Because that's what Bernie told me.
I wouldn't want to argue what Bernie had told you. I understand that there's probably no money come back into the benefit of the taxpayer because you work them through a ring-fenced reserve at this stage. So once reserve becomes positive, we'll then start putting money back into the local community and taxpayer from it. But what it is doing is, again, to the old David Dickinson, wiping its face.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Centre, basically.
Sorry, I didn't catch.
I'm just saying, Bill, a £3 centre.
Right. Thank you.
It's not free.
Okay. Are there any other questions before we go to a vote on this? If there's not, we will go to the vote. We have two recommendations. The first one is to support this report, including the changes as per the addendum circulated today. I take it everybody's had the opportunity to look at it. If you want to do these, we do them separately. So if we do item 1, as I say, to support this report, because all those in favour, please show, please.
Angus Ross here. I hope my hand has gone up.
Can't see it, but you're saying yes, are you?
I am.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Oop, hold on. Lost you. Yep, got you. Okay, Madeline, are you taking these?
Yes, I can see 4 hands.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to put your hands down, please. Okay, those against? And therefore those abstaining. 2, 3. I think I'm right in saying 3 abstentions, is that right?
That's right.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that recommendation is carried. And we go on to the second recommendation, which is the Treasury Management Strategy, including the amendments as set out in Appendix A. All those in favour?
I believe my hand has raised this time, Chairman Angus.
Yes, it has, yes. Okay, so it looks like 4. You agree, Madeline?
That's right.
Yeah. If you'd like to lower your hands, please. Those against? 2. We have 2 against, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. If you lower your hands. Maria, could you lower your hand? Thank you. Do we have any abstentions? Oh, sorry, we've got Rachel. Yes, thank you very much. 1. Okay. So that recommendation is carried as well. Thank you very much. I don't think there's any other items to be discussed. We have another meeting on the 22nd of February.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, do you have to vote on 3 to note the cumulative financial impact on the council of its borrowing activities?
Sorry, where was that?
There's a recommendation 3, and I think we've just voted on recommendation 2.
Hold on, I'm missing it then. I've only got the 2 at the moment.
Oh, I've got the cumulative financial impact on the council of its borrowing activities equates to a net benefit for the taxpayer per head of £13.64 and £62.86 at the end of 2023-24.
Right. Does everybody have that one? Am I the only one who can't find it at the moment?
It's on page 25 of the agenda.
Is it? Right, let me go down. Hold on just a sec. Let me go down 25. Where am I? Wrong way to go yet. Bear with me. We'll get there in a minute. Sorry, you're right. Yes. Okay, so yeah, the recommendation here is to support the report and recommend it to the executive on the 18th of February 2021. The executive will then be asked to recommend the report to council. So can we have a vote on that one, please? All those in favour, please raise your hand.
Sorry, I'm really confused about what we voted on now. I've got number 1 to support this report, number 2 the Treasury Management.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. Well, this is it. And then, wait a minute, let me go back.
My last vote was on the Treasury Management.
Yeah. Sorry, the one that we voted on is that recommendation with the addition of the amendments made, I believe. Perhaps.
I thought the last vote I had was on the Treasury Management one.
I don't think we voted on 3, unless I've been losing the plot.
You haven't voted on 3, so the one that you voted on first was number 1 in the agenda, plus obviously the additional changes which have been circulated today and are in the supplementary agenda.
Mm-hmm.
The one that you voted on was the Treasury Management Strategy, including Appendix A, and then you do still need to vote on recommendation 3 on page 2.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I haven't got down to recommendation 3. Yes, you're absolutely right. Sorry about that. Yeah, so recommendation 3, to note the cumulative financial impact on the council of its borrowing activities equates to a net benefit for the taxpayer, Band D, of 1364 at the end of 2021-22, and noting the net benefit increase to 6286 at the end of 2023-24. Okay, so all those in favour of that recommendation, please show. I see 4 hands. If you'd like to lower your hands, please. Oop, I'm saying lower. Right. Those against? I think we have 2. If you'd lower your hands, thank you. And those abstaining? We have 1. So that recommendation is carried as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's the 3 recommendations dealt with. And I think that brings us to the end of the meetings, unless there's any other items, which, as I say, we do have a further meeting this month on the 22nd. So any other issues will be brought up to that meeting. With no other business, can I say that the meeting is closed? So a good night to you all.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, Chairman. Thank you. Thank you to all.